Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's great to be here. So as Eileen said, my name is Angela Kyle. I'm a TCLF board member, and I also divide my time between Florida and Louisiana, so have a lot of ties to the area that is our geographic focus today. Today's discussion does continue the exploration of sites of resistance. Just to say a bit more about that theme, last year in a prescient move for the 20th anniversary of the landslide series, when deciding the themes for TCLF's annual report, Charles Nordwennerstrom and the editorial team decided rather than focus on the tangible, meaning actual physical sites and their physical features, they decided to focus on this idea of protest. And public protests obviously have been integral to American history, and it's also very evident today that we are living in a moment of protests with the numbers of individuals rising up in our own communities to make their voices heard at unprecedented levels. The report featured 13 locations around the country that have served as stages for significant protests. And as Eileen said, many of these sites are at risk of being forgotten. The focus of today's discussion are the historic levees along the southern Mississippi, specifically the 28.5-mile stretch of riverbanks in St. John the Baptist Parish, where a rich tapestry of stories have played out, including one of the largest and bloodiest slave revolts in America, a key civil rights protest and student walkout, and a 1970s push for interracial peace, love, and community. All of these staged against the backdrop of a landscape constantly under siege from the natural elements. The three speakers who are with us today, Susan Turner, Brian Davis, and Dr. Joy Banner, all have different relationships to the levees. And what we want to do for you here is unpack how this one location can be so layered with narrative and what kinds of opportunities that presents to engage in ongoing acts of interpretation. So I'm going to hand over first to Brian Davis, Executive Director of the Louisiana Trust for Historic Preservation, to start us off with a history lesson of the Mississippi River levees. Brian will then be followed by Dr. Joy Banner, co-founder of the Descendants Project in Laplace, Louisiana, to talk about her work and specifically focus on the woodland plantation and the significance of that site. Joy will then be followed by Susan Turner of Susan Turner Associates, who will respond to Brian and Joy's remarks and lead us into our group discussion. So Brian, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. Screen over here. I want to give you a little background about just really what the levees are, because realizing also that some folks may not be from the Mississippi Delta region where levees are a part of our daily lives. So in Louisiana, we see that kind of a boot-shaped state, but so much of that is uninhabitable. I would say uninhabitable because we do find a way to use the land and inhabit those spaces. But many places in the southern part of the state are swamp and marshlands, as you can see here in the satellite view, and also calling out where St. John the Baptist Parish is, just upriver from New Orleans. In Louisiana, we really are a patchwork of cultures, of geography, but also Louisiana is very much about where you can get across a body of water. Southern Louisiana is made up of many different delta lobes of the Mississippi River. Historically, about every 500 to 1,200 years, the avulsion of sediments there at the base of the river puts pressure on it, and it looks for a new channel to go into. And as you can see right now, we are approaching the 600-year mark with that. And so there's always a battle of keeping the river or trying to tame the river best we can. And so levees that we know of are man-made structures that are built on top of a natural levee, where the annual flooding comes in, deposits sediment next to the main channel, and over time this builds up. Since the 1700s, we have tried to construct higher levees there to control the river and keep it in play. And so the first recorded levees, man-made levees that by Europeans were in New Orleans by the Public Works contractor for Louis XV. You can see here, as in Wallace and St. John the Baptist Parish, kind of the view from the road that is Highway 18, which is next to the levee, as well as a view toward the levee, toward the river on the right side, and kind of what that is. It's almost it's a wall to some extent, blocking the view of day-to-day traffic on the river largely, but at the top of it, it can be a vantage point as well. We remember that the Mississippi River was America's main street, and still is to some extent. I think it's important to realize how much this river has played in the country's development and its commerce, from shipping to transportation of people and goods up and down the river. Levees historically are a path of travel, keeping our feet wet as we go along the natural levees and now on the man-made levees as well. They are high ground in times of flood, and as you can see on the upper right, the bike paths for recreation now in St. Charles Parish, across the river from and just downriver from St. John the Baptist. Levees are also a stage for us here in Louisiana. We have a tradition of Christmas bonfires that are ignited on Christmas Eve. With the part of the tradition is to light the way for Père Noël to see, and for folks also to be able to travel to their churches for midnight service there in heavily Catholic southern Louisiana. And so these are constructed and then set afire on Christmas Eve. Levees have also been a stage for protest. As mentioned, there were from the slave revolt of 1811 to the civil rights, the protest of firing of several teachers in Edgard in 1968. These were places where to be seen, to go onto the levees and show others that the impact that these events were making in the local community. There's also a stage for declarations. This is views of May of 2023, when the Louisiana Trust for Historic Preservation joined with the local community and the National Trust for Historic Preservation to add the 11 miles of West St. John the Baptist Parish to the America's 11 Most Endangered Historic Places list. And so declaring that this is a very important cultural landscape, that it was under attack through industrial oversaturation, was an important part and recognized on a national level. Levees are also a place for survival and a tool for survival, for protection of life and crops here from the annual snow melts and the annual floods that come here, typically from around February through June of each year. And so it's a way to protect the livelihood that we have. Levees are also a location for survival and refuge during these times of flood, where many livestock and families may have lived on the levees because it was the only high ground around. This is from the 1927 Mississippi River flood, which was the largest of our in historic times that we've experienced. Levees are also power and vulnerability. This is a photo from the 1927 flood just south of New Orleans, where the Carnarvon crevasse was created by detonating charges there at the levee, in the thought of really showing, taking off the pressure of the flood from New Orleans. It was really more of an outward show to the rest of the world that New Orleans was able to control this because the levees upriver had already started failing and relieving some of the pressure at that time. But what it did to the cultural landscape south of there by washing away many communities and their livelihoods from trapping and some of the other fishing and other things at that time was detrimental on a major level. The levee system is also about control. This is the Old River Control Structure in North Point Coupee Parish, north of St. John the Baptist. And this is at this point where the Corps of Engineers is trying to keep the Mississippi River back in its current channel. At this point, the Atchafalaya, which was a former channel of the Mississippi, is 18 feet lower than the level of the Mississippi River. And so the river naturally wants to get back into that lower path of least resistance going toward the Gulf. And so at this point, about 30% of the volume of the Mississippi River is shaved off into that Atchafalaya Basin, as well as through other flood spillways and flood control structures during those spring floods. We also, I think, with historically, the levee systems were the responsibility of landowners. And this is an 1850s map showing the French arpent system of the way that land was surveyed and divided here in the lower Mississippi River. And it was the responsibility, the legal responsibility of each of the property owners to maintain a levee there at their property. And so it was not just only for their livelihood, but for the protection of their community. And I think also as we get into the 20th century, many of these plantations were larger parcels and they were easy to buy up for industry. This is a view of San Francisco Plantation, which is across the river in St. John the Baptist Parish, but it was purchased by Marathon Oil in the 1970s, and that is now a tank farm and refinery. You can see the historic house that is there is a National Historic Landmark, but it is now located in the middle of an industrial field. And this is the case where many plantations are purchased and the land used for industrial purposes here in St. John and lower extent of the Mississippi River, basically from Baton Rouge to the mouth of the river. This is shows the location of where we were just seeing the video there at San Francisco. But note the stark difference between the upper part of the screen here, showing the industrial plants on the east bank of the Mississippi River in St. John the Baptist Parish, and the agricultural land on the south bank of the river. This was isolated. The only access really was a car ferry until the past maybe 20 years. There was a bridge that was connected at Wallace in the late 90s, and at that point it really opened up more vehicular traffic and also the threat of industrial intrusion in here. And so it's really important for us to fight that. And I think as we just mentioned with the plantations being purchased and turned into industrial sites, I think the landowners there have a responsibility to also protect their community, because there really has been an oversaturation of industry in St. John the Baptist Parish. And because of that, the area is in the 95 percentile of cancer rates in the country because of the chemicals that are being put into the air and the water here. And so I think it really is a chance when folks are offered, have that opportunity to think about what their actions are going to do by selling out and what that impact will have on the community around them, which in many cases, most cases, if not all, are family members to some extent. So, and with that, I will turn it back over.
Brian, thank you so much. I'm going to now cue Joy to share your slides. Joy, I think you might be on mute.
How many times do we do this and we never, oh my goodness.
Exactly.
So anyway, thank you so much. And by the way, can you see my little presenter screen on the side, or do I need to minimize that too?
I only see your slides, so I think you're good.
Okay, okay, good. Just making sure. So anyway, so my name is I'm Joy Banner, and I'm co-founder and co-director of the Descendants project with my identical twin sister, Jo Banner. And I say that as a warning because depending on who you see, it could be me or it could be my sister Jo. So if there's a couple of moments of awkwardness, that is why. But anyway, the Descendants Project is based in Wallace, Louisiana, in much of the same area that Brian was talking about. In fact, Brian is a great friend and great ally of us in our efforts to protect our community from the industrialization that he was talking about. So I'm going to try to not repeat some of the things that he said, but there is a little bit of crossover. So I'm going to apologize right now. So first of all, the Descendants Project, we're a justice-focused organization engaged in reparative work that dismantles the environmental, economic, and social harms caused by the plantation to pollution through line in Louisiana's Cancer Alley. So first, me and my twin sister, we started with a background in tourism and really in plantation tourism. And so with Jo and I, we as members, as residents of the community of Wallace, as Black descendants of the plantations that are in our community, we saw that the plantation tourism industry was a thriving one, but that many of the plantations did not tell the story of our ancestors and of slavery. And for me, I'm a former business professor. I saw that the economic opportunity for descendant communities, the ability to transition out of industry was also an opportunity that I felt that we wanted to bring to the community. So that started as the heart of the Descendants Project. But in our efforts to protect our community, we are in Louisiana's Cancer Alley, in that industrialization. So that is something that we definitely had to contend with in order to do anything, in order to stay in our communities and thrive. We had to address these harms of slavery. So part of our strategy is historic protections, which I'll touch on. A big part of our work has become the United Nations and international advocacy. In fact, both me and my sister were in Geneva at the UN a couple of weeks ago in two separate intervention opportunities. And we've had to use legal strategies, including First Amendment rights, including zoning. Just different ways that we have to protect ourselves. And like I mentioned before, economic development attached with tourism. So just to give you sort of an example of the economic development potential, in my parish, St. John Baptist, which is about 50 miles west of New Orleans, visitors brought about $80 million annually, or bring about $80 million to visit St. John the Baptist Parish. So there's a lot of opportunity there. So again, here is my community of Wallace. And like Brian was saying earlier, the East Bank of the Mississippi River in St. John Parish is inundated with the industry. But the West Bank in my community, Brian, I believe that you also took this drone shot as well, is my community of Wallace. And so recently in this little tiny little building right here is our cafe. Here is the headquarters of the Descendants Project. That is a plantation from the 1800s that we're currently restoring. And all of the area here is basically my family / neighborhood, because that's how it goes in Louisiana. And then so you see where we are next to this large agricultural site. This is a site that was threatened by that industrialization that Brian was talking about earlier. It was a grain terminal complex with massive infrastructure as tall as the Statue of Liberty. And you can even see back here in the field, that is as far as Greenfield got, because we fought them tooth and nail all the way, sat through many 106 meetings, many court cases, but we were successful in being able to keep Greenfield and that industrialization out of our community. However, this land, this 1,400 acres, is still owned by Greenfield. So the next goal is to obtain this land. And by the way, you can see this this sort of inhabited place at the back. That's Whitney Plantation, and at Greenfield land, it literally. And thank you for all of the love that I see, all of the hearts popping up. But all of this, all of the cane field, that's all Greenfield, right? So that's 1,400 acres, and you see here is nice. You have your woodlands. But all of this is in danger from industrialization. At the moment, this land is currently zoned as industrial, and we are in the courts fighting to flip it again back to residential. And I think we will be successful with that too. So again, here's a plantation tourism that I was talking about. So we have still about a dozen or so plantations in that area that that give tours. Whitney Plantation being the only one as of recently, before I talk to you about our plantation Woodland, that focused really on the story of enslaved people as the focus. And so we are in this paradox of having a region that is heavily visited, but then as you can see, this couple that's on the porch drinking their mint juleps, right? So as someone that's part of the descendant community, you know that is and on these sites and trying to, you know, you're learning about the history literally of your people. It is, as you can imagine, very difficult and very traumatic to witness this kind of scenery on the sites of plantations. So which brings us to Woodland Plantation. Woodland is the origin site of the 1811 slave revolt. And for the first time in its 230 plus year history, in 2024, it is Black owned and stewarded by the Descendants Project. So that's me and my sister. See, I told you we were twins on the porch, but we are very happy to be the stewards, particularly of this place, because we wanted to make sure that the story of resistance, the story of rebellion, and that story of slavery was being told, and that this house would not be used for plantation weddings or for Airbnbs. I'll also say that the Greenfield company that was planning to build in my community of Wallace. So Woodland is on the east bank of the Mississippi River, so almost directly across from my community of Wallace that I showed you. But the company Greenfield entered into a partnership with the executive director at Woodland Plantation because this site was not sustainable. The executive director had not been successful in keeping this, you know, financially viable. And so they entered into a partnership to keep the museum open for another few months. And that is when, you know, I really understood the threat to Woodland site in the way that, you know, industry is using our history, especially Black history, to push back against, you know, the environmental racism and injustice that's in our community. So I just wanted to show you like what are we doing with the site now. So here you have a picture of on the left is one of the costumes from the historic reenactment. The artist Dred Scott came down in 2019 and as a art project to rebellion reenacted the rebellion in St. John the Baptist Parish, and we have his costume, some of the costumes on loan. This particular costume is one of a woman who was a participant in the rebellion. So even in that resistance, women, the contributions of women are often not realized. And so our researcher, our historian, actually found 3 women, one who we know was imprisoned, and 2 we don't know their whereabouts, but they were not, unlike the participants of the 1811 slave revolt, who started the rebellion at Woodland and then marched down along the levee, along the Mississippi River, to eventually try to capture New Orleans and obtain their freedom. They were cut off by the military. About 60 of them were tried and convicted, and as a punishment, they were killed and their heads were decapitated. I'm sorry to be to be graphic, but their heads were decapitated and placed on pikes on the levee in front of the plantations where they had self-liberated. So that is the history that we have with this, and there were 3 women who were participants in that rebellion. But one of the other aspects of what we're doing with Woodland is to serving as a cultural and archaeological and arts center for the descendant community. So what you see in these photos is an archaeology pit that was dug by Dr. Gray out of the University of New Orleans. And we started to dig the foundation of the 18th century kitchen that is outside and still by the site. Here we have a picture of a community member. So we want to do we're doing community archaeology. And so letting the community come in and have the opportunity to take part in, digging or excavating, the kitchen, the cabins. And the banner that you see on the right hand is we had descendants from our community sign this, and my sister brought this with her to the United Nations in our advocacy work for the environmental protection, especially of Black communities. We also, for our July 10th event, so we had the descendants of Harriet Tubman. And so you might be saying July 10th, you're a month off, Joy. But actually we decided to celebrate July 10th because that is when St. John the Baptist Parish obtained freedom. So it's mid-July in 1864. So this is sort of our freedom celebration. And this is Dr. Brickler and his son, another Dr. Brickler. The older Dr. Brickler is a gynecologist, obstetrician, pediatrician, delivers babies. And then the other Dr. Brickler is a professor. And then we have one other Brickler who is getting his doctorate, I think, at MIT. So Harriet Tubman would be very proud of her descendants. We were really excited to have them. And then Sultana, that you see here on the left, is our executive director for Woodland Plantation. So just another couple of celebrations. It feels so great, y'all, to be able to have a celebration at a plantation space, but we get to celebrate the way that we want to. And so the artist that we have featured is the Honorays who's a descendant of Destrehan Plantation. This is her and her husband, who's a chief in New Orleans, and Sister Sula, who is a musician and priestess out of New Orleans. So I just as I end my portion, I wanted to show, when we talk about Cancer Rally and we talk about industry, the yellow dots that you see are the former plantations, and the red dots that you see are now the industrial sites. So you can see how that's almost a one-to-one ratio, right? And this pathway along the Mississippi River, as you can see here in the middle, it's also the same pathway that the self-emancipated revolutionaries, is the same path that they took to free themselves to New Orleans. And so that same pathway is now some of the most polluted areas of the country in Louisiana. And in fact, one of the attacks happened in what's known as a narco area, which is, I think, probably, literally one of the most polluted places in the country, if not the world. So I just will stop there. We're talking about the targeting the environmental racism, and that our communities have been shown to be targeted based on race. And so while, again, we have environmental issues and we are allies, with anyone, with our white brothers and sisters or anyone in this community of any race. But the truth is that if you are a Black neighborhood, then your exposure to emissions is 7 to 21 times more toxic. So we understand that. But when we're talking about this attitude of resistance and rebellion and freedom and justice, plantations and the plant are all one and the same. And so we use both of those aspects to inform and educate the public, and to, again, gain support and gain justice for our well-being. And I will stop it there. Thank you.
Joy, thank you so much. Wow, thank you for sharing so much of that rich history and just also so much of the color around what you guys are doing now at Woodland. It's really inspiring to see. I'm now going to ask Susan as our respondent to just share some thoughts on the material that Brian and Joy have presented and to kind of lead us into our conversation. We'll have a few, I have a few questions to kind of kick us off, and then we will open it up and take some questions from folks on the Zoom. Susan?
Thank you. And Joy mentioned the word paradox, and I think that that could be the title of my comments. As the oldest of this auspicious group, I have spent all but 8 years when I was in Georgia going to school, about a mile from the Mississippi River, either where I grew up, where I live and have lived for the last 50 years, on the LSU campus, at my grandmother's house in Plaquemine, which would have been on the, I mean, you know, anyway, that river is ever present. And my comments are going to be not a reverie necessarily, but they're going to be very personal in terms of what's going on and basically what has gone on throughout my whole professional career, at least, if not my life. I mean, the dilemma of white and black is something that when you're born in 1950, you were constantly living in the middle of, if you were in this area. And I know that's not unique at all. I mean, it was where the country was. But we would, as children, go each day with my mother and drive to the ferry landing in Baton Rouge, where we lived, so that my grandmother's servant, sister, cook, and the woman who essentially helped raise my mother could ride the ferry home to her place in Plaquemine after my grandmother left Plaquemine. And as a younger child, every day we would drive down River Road to a lane that was not paved and down which we couldn't really traverse if it had rained, because Ella, the person who took care of us growing up, lived at the end of the lane right next to that neighborhood church. And then eventually Ella came no more. And it was only as I grew up and began to understand some of this paradox of the life I was experiencing, did I learn that Ella had contracted syphilis and had died. And so I've spent a lot of time in the plantation context because I'm trained as a landscape architect and as a historian. And when I started teaching, I was fascinated by what documentation existed that might have been the historical roots of what I was experiencing. And some of you may know that LSU has a great collection of what's called plantation papers. Of course, they're all related to the planter family and the business of agriculture. And I spent, I might say, years reading correspondence between particularly plantation women, the mistresses of the plantation, as they were known, among their family members, with their husband. I was really looking for indications of where horticulture and agriculture impacted their own lives. Everybody wanted to know of the early gardens in Louisiana, and there wasn't a lot that was known except for what survived. So Rosedown survived, but I realized that I was only hearing one part of the story, obviously. I also realized that people in the plantation industry, if we're going to call it that, the tourism, were beginning to be anxious to be able to tell a broader story. And one of the best experiences for me was working with the Shadows on the Teche in New Iberia, which is owned by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And I never can remember how many documents were in those papers, but you know, it was in the many thousands. So it really did take 2 years to read through everything while I was at the same time teaching 4 classes. And but I came away with a real interest in going further. And so through my career, I've worked for Whitney when Whitney was threatened, and before its recent purchase and reinterpretation, because we were trying to save the house, particularly the big house, as we all know is called, because it had some of the most interesting paintings on the walls and doors of that house. And I grew up in a household where architecture, decorative arts, landscaping, and the roots of the historic preservation movement in Louisiana were all being, and I'm sorry, I have no slides to show you, so look at Brian's face, please. But I grew up in a house of a little old lady in tennis shoes who, because she did not work with 5 children, she dedicated most of her adult life to trying to save the places that she had grown up around. Her family had a sugar mill until the beginnings of the decimation of the sugar industry as it once existed in all of the small little pies that you can see on this map. And thanks for putting the map up. And somebody has to tell me when I need to shut up. But so this idea of tourism and, you know, cultural tourism, cultural landscape, all of those things are important to me, but I've also watched from the inside all of these institutions struggling with the ability to support cultural tourism. Joy, I think it's the only way to go. But there's a whole other piece of the pie. Okay, I'm so glad Brian found these pictures for me. So I own, because my husband loves me and knew that this was a passion of mine early in our marriage 40 years ago, this particular, what you see is really a woodland now. And on the side, the plantation house, but the plantation house burned in 1920. The garden survived. It's probably the most talked about ornamental garden in the South during its heyday. More so, I would say, than Rosedown, which is beautiful and where I've worked for 13 years on the garden diary. But this garden was built by a planter who owned at least 200 slaves, and those numbers vary, and had 3 daughters. He owned hugely important property in this area. He was the former owner of Oak Alley and swapped property, so he'd have plantations to give to his daughters. Anyway, this is what survived. My time is up. I am hell-bent to use this place as one way to talk about the time, the culture, both Black and white. Obviously, all of these places were shaped by Black hands. So I will yield my time, as they say in the big city. And sorry that I talked about my own personal experience so much, but Joy's and I'm so bad with names. Joy's and Angela's comments, and Brian's, obviously. Brian is a great ally, and God bless him, triggered these reflections for me. So I'd like to maybe hear some comments from audience or panelists about anything I said, but particularly the paradox and the fact that in here we are in 2025, we've been talking about this paradox for a long time. Have we made progress? And I thank Joy, because that's my neck of the woods with my little 10 acres, and people need to understand a hell of a lot more of what they're looking at when they're there.
Susan, thank you so much, and thank you for sharing your personal story and your personal history. I think that the fact that you own this land creates a really interesting opportunity to connect the past to the potential for the future. So you absolutely should not apologize for sharing your personal stories. Does anyone, Joy or Brian, do either of you want to just kind of comment or address Suzanne's question?
I'll just mention the fact that one thing that I didn't mention earlier was that there was a bridge that was constructed in Baton Rouge in the 1930s, and it was intentionally built low enough to where it would hold all of the industry. It was by Huey P. Long, so that the tankers, even at that day, were not able to go any further up the river than Baton Rouge. And so that's why we have this concentration of industry down in that lower level of the river. Which in St. John the Baptist Parish, at the foot of the levee, it's only 15 feet above sea level. So it's vulnerable for many different reasons, not just from storm surges to industrial intrusion to loss of this extremely rich culture that has been there for 400 years. And so it's a really vulnerable area. And I know that a couple of years ago that there was a determination of eligibility to the National Register for this area, and then that was rescinded due to a technicality, and it was really blown out of the water, blown out of proportion about the importance of the fact that it was no longer deemed historic, and that's not the case. It just means that there was not an active permit being at the time that the keeper made their decision that this was eligible for the National Register. And so, again, is still continues to be and will continue to be a very important part of our culture and our history, especially about the history of agriculture in our nation. So. Another thing that we're working on is a year ago, we launched the Louisiana Cemetery Register of Historic Cemeteries, and this is to locate those burial grounds of all cultures that are throughout the state, but especially in areas here where to know where those are and before they're intruded upon.
Thank you for that. I mean, I'll just comment that I think, you know, two of the themes from the two of the themes from the landslide inaction from the report from Sites for Resistance, the report touch on interpretation. And just going back to my comment at the beginning about narrative, like the levees represent, there's so many layers of narrative in this location. It's not one location, right? It's multiple locations. And you know, the themes that we unpacked and talked about in the report are, you know, kind of on-site interpretation. And so, you know, what gets posted, what gets you know, presented physically in these places, and but then also online, right? Online interpretation. And I'm just curious if any of you have thoughts about how we think about interpretation, given that, you know, again, all of these layers, but also the fact that there is this ongoing interpretation, like the Dred Scott, you know, kind of a performance art experience that happened a few years ago. And, you know, just I feel like there's an interesting opportunity where this blurring of the lines between like what happens, how things are interpreted on site, right, and in the location, because of the, you know, the where we are now, right, at the sociocultural moment that we're in now, and you know, social media, and just, you know, everyone's ability to publish and broadcast their own interpretations, that there's this kind of interesting blurring of the lines when it comes to interpretation. So just wanted to just, you know, open that up to see if that sparks anything for anyone, or if you have any thoughts on that from an ongoing interpretation perspective.
Well, you know, I think when we're talking about, you know, yes, interpretation, but it is, you know, at the end of the day, it's a plantation, right? You know, like and as those of us that are stewards or owners or directors of plantation sites, you know, we are engaging with, you know, the primary data, the journals, you know, the business records of these plantation owners who are talking about slavery very openly, right? And like in our interpretation on hitting on that note is very much similar to what, you know, to what these primary source documents are. And so I think, you know, when we're talking about, and I think there is often, you know, yes, there's a paradox of, you know, no, actually it's not a paradox. The paradox is in the expectation of what, you know, these plantation houses are supposed to represent in terms of, you know, a tourist experience. But at the end of the day, that is not being true to what a plantation is, right? And so when those of us are like, we are interpreting this accurately, then it's often seen as, you know, we're focusing too much on slavery. We're focusing too much on the trauma of it. And it's like, there is very little that we do, in my opinion, in the materials that we engage with in telling the story. There is not much that you can tell about a plantation experience that does not have enslaved people and that labor at the center of it.
Mm.
And just one piece, and I think it kind of, I don't know if we're going into the questions now, but where we are also missing out on with plantations, yes, this is about black and white, right? But the black and white was created for economics, for the financial, you know, financial empowerment of a few over a lot. Whether even if you were white, does not mean that you were a white plantation owner, right? And so if we don't, you know, if we don't see that this system was being used to, you know, to take power away from a democracy, you know, and have people that are going onto the site and acting like, you know, this is our American royalty, then, you know, then it's not really like, that's probably not the position that your ancestors were in anyway. Like your kinship would not have been, your association would have been more with, you know, the experience of, you know, of a position where, you know, you are having to be controlled. You know, you weren't enslaved, but these were the people in power over your destiny, even to the point that they were the owners of the levy, right? So, I mean,
Mhm.
which were maintained by enslaved people. So it's like there's all of these different layers of the plantation system, and we just can't be afraid to talk about white and black, right? I mean, it is what it is. It's our country's history. If we want a true democracy, then we just got to get through the discomfort of having these discussions about race.
Thank you for saying that. Very, very well said, Joy. Thank you.
Absolutely. We've never had those kind of conversations, and I think that's the scars are still very visible and very open and need to be discussed more. And I think that's we're such tangible learners that having places where we can actually walk, it helps us envision or start to envision, not that we can fully do that, but we can start to try to put ourselves in the context of the landscape that to help us better understand some of these parts of our past.
Right.
I want to pull on that thread of just like, you know, some of the comments, Joy, you just made about, so I mean, economic power, ownership, control, um, in thinking about, you know, the plantation economics, right, and the economics of slavery, but pulling it through to and kind of drawing some parallels to present day and this kind of industrial, you know, the kind of the industrial activity, right, that's taken place, and the kind of the corporate interests that have come in, and this ongoing like industrialization. Um, you know, I mean, I feel like we're in a moment where, you know, a lot of large private sector interests make noises about social responsibility, social impact, right? From your experience and what you've seen in Southeast Louisiana, uh, you know, what do you think it's possible to play nice with some of these private sector interests?
So, you know, that connection, and I see a couple of comments asking about, you know, the impact of industry and don't we need it? No, we don't need it. We didn't need it before the industry came in, you know, and that's kind of like that's going into the myth that we are waiting for somebody to come and save us from, you know, from what? From a beautiful community that we love. You know, we were self-sufficient before. We didn't ask for them to come in, they came in, right? And then now bolstered by billions of dollars in incentives. So we have these industries that are coming in and saying, like, you need us for the tax dollars, you know, that we're going to bring to your community. Oh, and by the way, the only way that we're going to come here is if you give us tax incentives. By the way, I was a business professor for 8 years, so I get really passionate about economic development. I'm an LSU grad too, twice. Anyway, I just want to slip that in. But yeah, so like that whole idea of we need something to come in, a big corporation to come in order for us to be viable and important is unreal. I mean, it's untrue. Like the impact of oil and gas, it is a tiny, a much smaller portion of our GDP. By the way, my parents worked for oil and gas, for Shell and Union Carbide, you know, so I'm part of the paradox as well. But there are much better ways for us to be sustainable and green. Our, you know, our coastal environment is just scarred. I mean, just lacerated with pipelines, right? We have abandoned wells that's still draining oil. Like we are suffering. We are being sacrificed for the industry. And, you know, I just lastly will say 1811 was a slave revolt. The master of Woodland Plantation was Andrew Plantation. He was a casualty, but his son was, you know, he was a casualty. He was attacked, right, as a result of slavery. And so do you think somebody said, well, you know, people are getting attacked. Well, why don't we stop enslaving people? Right? You would think that a lot of people would have said, we better stop this. But no, I mean, they didn't. They continued on. Right. And so that just shows you when it comes down to capitalism and economics, people are willing to sacrifice a lot They were sacrificing their own families. They were sacrificing, their own safety for capitalism. And that's what we should be understanding about plantations as historic corporations and the corporations that are operating now, if they're not operating for the right reasons.
Yeah. There's very much a savior complex to build on what Joy just mentioned here with industry in this area. They come in and we're going to be the savior of your tax base, your jobs. We're going to provide this all for you. Just get out of our way so we can build this. And then when they realize that the amount of pollution and the other impacts that are happening, it's too late. It's already built.
Yes.
Thank you both for that. I'm going to turn now. I think we just have a few minutes, about 15 minutes left. So I'm going to turn now to some of the questions in our Q&A. I'm seeing a number of questions in the Q&A and then some others in the chat. So I'm going to start working my way down and hopefully we can address a few of these comments. So the first one, how can we support the conversion of more plantations into more accurate representations of their history? Specifically, asking as a landscape architect, what types of projects and interventions would be best pursued?
I think for one thing, the archaeological record is extremely important in sites that have not been tilled so far. There are, I think, looking at from a cultural landscape, more of the oral history that is there along the river road. There are many different opportunities to look at that and to try to interpret, use of the land, how it historically has been used, and opportunities for future use that will be in synchrony with the continuing of the families that have lived there for hundreds of years.
I want to say to Joy, thank you, because the grain elevator, Greenwood, that is an example of resistance that can work. And I see it happening more and more now. And we all know the corruption of the process of review by the Corps of Engineers. Yep. Landscape historians write reports and then they're never seen, even though it's part of the law. I mean, it's not unlike the East Wing of the White House. It's hard not to get discouraged. But I feel somewhat, maybe it happens when you're this old, optimistic, because there was in the paper a couple of days ago, and I don't ever remember names, but the people in the community said, we don't want this meta, whatever it is. And it was halted. And I know it's not going away. And I know that there are huge amounts of money, but I think we're at a really pivotal time in terms of the future of this land. I am in favor of agriculture as a future. And, I started a farmer's market 30 years ago in Baton Rouge. People are going to always need food, and they need good food. And so that's one of the alternatives that I feel like, especially in South Louisiana, we know how to eat, we know how to cook. If we're going to save ourselves and our land, those kinds of incentives, Joy, I know you're rolling your eyes.
Oh, no, I'm not, no.
I mean, it is naive, but it has happened in other parts of the country where their politics finally were controlled by people of reason. And so, I mean, I feel like we've all got to be a part of the discussion. And thank God you proved that it can happen.
Thank you. Well, and just for the comment about agriculture, not rolling my eyes because I've been looking at sustainable sugarcane practices. So we have a big agricultural, a big agrochemical and fertilizer problem that, you know, it's leaking into the Mississippi River and creating a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. But there are alternative ways of sugarcane cropping, and how do we turn those big fields? And the fertilizer industry is a big reason why we're growing so many large monocrops. We can use that
Right.
agricultural land for, you know, for to eliminate food deserts. And also, I think that that is one of many great opportunities for these sites. And just a comment, I think someone, I want to be clear because someone said if we don't want to use it for tourism, then what? I believe in tourism. I love tourism. You know, I have my background is in tourism. I just believe that it has like tourism does not have to be hedonistic, I guess, in a way. Like maybe it's more, I guess, cultural, education and and preservation. But yeah, as long as I want people to come in and visit, I think it's great for our economy. And in fact, I'm training someone right now as a guide. But yeah, I think it can be, we just can have honest conversations, and we can also make sure that everyone is included, you know, in the telling of the story of these places and of our landscapes.
There's a clarifying question in the chat. I feel like you guys might have have kind of hit the nail on the head with this, but I'm gonna ask it anyway, just to maybe prompt an explicit response. So, are you suggesting that we need to restrict what the owners of the land in question can do with the land?
Well, the law restricts it, right? I mean, there is laws that's we are asking. What we do is that there are air laws. You have you know, water. You have, you know, soil. You have noise. Everything from traffic. So we are asking that whoever comes on these sites, they have to respect the law. And that is what has not been done. Louisiana has, you know, in our case, just given people permits and without any consideration of our rights. And that is what we fight. We don't do anything other than state our rights.
Okay, next question.
When I said agriculture, I surely didn't mean more sugarcane.
So this is a question about building on that. Are there any alternative agricultural products being explored, i.e. not sugar, cotton, tobacco, or the historic products which cost the land so much?
Well, so I'm looking, different things that I've looked at is the renaturation of the site. Um, I will say that with sugarcane, so okay, I've really delved a lot into it, more than I thought. But we actually have a threatened species of bat, the tricolored bat, and it actually benefits from agricultural fields with a habitat edge like woodlands. And so it is, so part of like the restoration, whatever would be done with the land, I hope that some of the sugarcane could be kept if it's sustainably grown, that we can use it because it's the best way to get our bat population back, because they can live on the edge in the woodlands and then be able to snack on the pesticides and the insects of the sugarcane. So even the sugarcane fields, there is some biological, you know, eco benefits to it there. And lots of, this is really rich land. We're part of the Mississippi Alluvial Valley. And so this is one of the last spots that along the Mississippi River that birds can rest before they migrate down to the south. So like bird sanctuaries, park spaces for the community, preservation of the artifacts that are still in the sugarcane fields. Because you can go into a sugarcane field now, and within 10 minutes, you'll find an artifact from the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. So those spaces artifacts need to be preserved or marked. I think there's lots of wonderful opportunities for all of the acreage that we have around us.
Well, cool, very cool. Thank you. I'm going to ask there's another question which relates to just connections. And I'll just tie it in with, just with the fact that woodland and the levees were featured in last year's landslide report. I'm curious, like how has your engagement with kind of being part of, like for lack of a better word, kind of this cohort of places or sites, how has that, or has it led to connections with other groups across the country, other organizations focus on environmental justice, or other individuals that are kind of also focused on stewarding these kind of sites of resistance?
Joy, you're probably with all of your connections. I mean, really, our being a part of the team that helped to took part in the Section 106 review for the Greenfield, Louisiana project that was proposed next to Wallace was really, held us cross-pollination with other groups from around the country, from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Their legal team was amazing, to the Descendants project, to many other groups that were all there to speak on their specialty area, and review the reports that were being put forward through this process through the Corps of Engineer permitting. And so it really was a great team building. But I know that Joy's with the Descendant project is a much broader net and connections there.
I mean, and Brian, a lot of sites and a lot of people too. But I've been so blessed to be able to connect with other people that are in the space, other descendant communities, and then also other owners of historic sites that are like there are people that are trying to do right by the history, like to acknowledge it. They have a site. They want it preserved, but they want to do it in a way that is just. And so I think that there's a lot of communication that we can have. We can help each other, like in these spaces. Like for like the potential of plantations. Do you know how much historical records that plantations often hold, and with researchers who know how to go through the genealogy, the information in a way that we as descendants, we don't have access, right? And so the fact that you have our genealogy at your hands, like that is a wonderful opportunity for African Americans, something that is restorative, because I do believe in having restorative and reparative measures, right? And those come in all kinds of forms. So I think if we start looking at I like the ways in which we imagine the way these sites can be healing, it doesn't have to be anything restrictive. And even I just kind of tossing it to, I think we have somebody who's kind of asking a lot of interesting questions in the chat. But like in terms of the manual labor for the sites, I know one of my best colleagues in the network is a Black woman who has her own rice farm, right? And so there is a lot of Black people that are in sugarcane work, in cotton work, in rice work, as a way of being restorative and having a different kind of relationship with crops and plants that did not ask to be extracted from and be the source of pain for someone else. So there's a lot of restorative and actually economically beneficial work and labor that's being done by Black descendants of American slavery.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm just going to ask one final question from the Q&A, since we have some folks on here who might be able to, this question might resonate for others who are still with us, and we might be able to provide some point to some resources. So this individual says, my understanding is that my ancestors had a plantation in Virginia in the 1700s and in Alabama in the 1800s. Is there a way for someone to find out where their ancestors' properties may have been in order to visit them? All done in an effort to acknowledge that history and learn from it. So if there's, that there is this history in your family, where does somebody start to kind of learn about or start doing research? Brian, do you have any tips?
I would think that, I mean, if you have access to programs like Ancestry or other genealogical resources that are available these days, looking there, starting there to find out where these people were located, what counties or parishes in Louisiana where they may have been, and then doing a deeper dive into land records in those parishes. There will be deeds of where land was bought and sold, and that would really be a good place for folks to start. I think really kind of narrow it down to a region where they may be able to actually step foot on those places where their ancestors did their own plantations or were enslaved. Or the Library of Congress is also another great site. Of course, your census records, all of those are great resources to start skimming you may have a family connection to a place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, your courthouses, your churches, and if your family owned plantations, then your family's last name, right, will be researching your family, you probably just even find out where some of those sites exist. I mean, because like as with many of us in the United States, especially here in Louisiana, my ancestors were also enslavers as well. So like but because of the last names associated with them, it's a lot easier to find out information on their side. Whereas for my African descendant side, I only get up to a certain point, and then it's hard to find any more information.
Yeah. That's one of the beautiful things about South Louisiana being so heavily Catholic, as opposed to the north part, which is largely Protestant, is that the Catholic Church, there are records, so many records there of a birth, of a death, of a baptism, of all of those are in your church records. So that's another great source.
The internet is a whole new world in general. I mean, you could ask some of these questions on just I was looking, I confess today, to see who was talking about Valcarame, because obviously he had lots of descendants, even though he only had 4 children. And people are asking questions back and forth. And I know there's danger on the internet and all that, but not for this kind of research.
Thank you, Susan. On that note, I mean, thanks to everyone. This has been an incredibly wide-ranging discussion, taking us from the history of this part of South Louisiana to a very powerful testimonial for the work that that Dr. Banner and her sister are doing in St. John the Baptist Parish in Laplace, and to contemplating what the future could look like. So I appreciate everyone for being here. It does seem like maybe there are a few people who might have ended up in the wrong webinar, but for all of you who joined us intentionally and shared very positive comments and feedbacks and remarks, thank you all. Aileen, I'll just ask you if you want to close us out with any just housekeeping and any announcements about upcoming TCLF upcoming events, live and virtual.
Of course. Thank you all so much for joining this conversation. For those of you here for the CEUs, Victor Stanley will reach out to you regarding those after you've completed the quiz. I believe they'll send them out in about a week. Up next for TCLF is the final webinar in this series, Elevating and Interpreting Chicano History. We'll be looking at the Ruben Salazar Park in LA and a collaboration between private organizations, community members, and government. So really join us for that, as that is the capstone of this Landslide in Action series. And then in December, and that will take place November 18th at 3 p.m. Eastern. And then in December 4th through 6th, we are back in LA, in person for our Soak It Up conference, both honoring the work of the late Konjun Yu and looking at water management in the Los Angeles area. And that will take place December 4th through 6th, and will be a day-long conference and some mobile work sessions on Saturday. Hope you can join us for all of those. Hope to see you November 18th, and thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.